Welcome to this episode of Hackers and Humans. I'm joined today by Oz Alashe. He is a CEO and founder of CybSafe. CybSafe is an adaptive human risk management platform for the AI era. It uses behavioral data and automation to detect, influence, and reduce workforce cyber risk in real time. He's a former UK Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel and brings deep expertise in intelligence, human networks, and cyber resilience. He's passionate about using technology to reduce societal threats and make the world more secure. Oz chairs the UK government's Cyber Resilience Expert Advisory Group, advises risks, and is an expert fellow at institutions including RUSI, which is the world's oldest security and intelligence think tank. He was awarded an MBE in 2010 for leadership in complex conflict environments. Thank you for joining us, Oz.
Hey, not at all, Ross. Thank you for having me. Good to see you.
Yeah, and I suggest everyone checks out Oz's Wikipedia page because he has a sword and it makes him, I feel like you look like a character from like Mr. Robot. You know, when the bad guys are being chased, it's like all of a sudden like, oh shit, Oz is on us. And they pull up your page on like a little green terminal and your, photo loads like line by line. And it's the vibe I got.
I'll pass that on to my wife, who actually is thick of the office. She's like, you just look like an idiot.
Man. Yeah. So, what sparked this discussion was, you and I were riffing on human risk management, which is, I think, a really important thing. And I feel like there's just been a lot of vendor washing going on, and a lot of people don't really know how to even describe it anymore. So the goal of this podcast is by the end, we will have a definition to describe HRM that should be a sentence. If it's more than that, we fail, and really just discuss kind of what it is, how you do it, how software tools can help. And I'm sure I'll have lots of like random opinions along the way because I never have those. So yeah, I was jumping into it. What is HRM?
Yeah, such a good question. Hey, Ross, you're right. Obviously our conversations, which I always enjoy, we're talking about and have been talking about various things, and HRM comes up. I feel right now that HRM is like, in many ways, it's like the fastest way to trigger all sorts of reactions of all sorts of people. Whether that's people who are like die hard in the wall, yeah, HRM will die, man. And then in the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got people who are like super skeptical, like really frustrated and really upset with this idea. Why are we changing anything? We don't need to change the name. We don't need to change any terms. Nothing else has changed. And I think in many ways that kind of reflects where not just the industry is right now, but also in part the good news, the evolution, and in part the bad news, the kind of confusion. So one thing I guess I would state is not at all personally died in the world about any particular term. I think it's the principle and the concept that matters. But also when I explain what I think HRM is and what we at CybSafe think HRM is, we're very aware of the fact that not everybody sees the world like this. But let me explain to you how we see it. We believe that HRM is the use of data in order to identify and measure risky behaviors, and then to address them in real time with automated, personalized interventions. So it's really no more complex than that. It's the use of data to identify and measure risky behaviors, and then address them in real time with automated, personalized interventions. The reason that we believe it's that, and then more importantly, the thing that we think is fundamentally different to the way the industry has tried to address the human aspect of cybersecurity up until now, is they focuses on the outcomes. It asks one very simple question: did anything change? We did a bunch of stuff. Did anything change? If you can't answer that question, I would suggest you're not really leaning into HRM.
I guess, what are examples of risky behaviors?
Wonderful question. Not least of which because I believe that behaviors are the fulcrum of everything to do with human risk. So some good examples of risky behaviors, and for anybody who maybe hasn't come across the idea and concept of user security behaviors before, then you should check out the Security Behavior Database. The Security Behavior SebDB, known lovingly as SebDB. That is a catalog, a digital compendium of all the security behaviors that might be appropriate or relevant for the risks that you care about. So some examples of risky behaviors. Risky behaviors might include, of course, I'm going to pick on the ones that everybody thinks about all the time, but ultimately are maybe does somebody click on a phishing email? That's a risky behavior. Does somebody report or not report a phishing email that they received? That's another risky behavior. Two separate behaviors there. Does somebody submit data into a phishing email that they received? There's a third behavior there. Does somebody browse unauthorized or dodgy websites? There's a behavior there. Does somebody submit sensitive data or input sensitive data into a GenAI tool? Another behavior there. There's so many examples. Does somebody use a strong password or indeed a weak password? There's a behavior there. These are all examples of individual security behaviors, and they all matter depending on the risk outcome you're trying to avoid. depending on the risk outcome you're trying to avoid. There are a whole bunch of risk outcomes. Malware infection is a risk outcome. Data leakage is a risk outcome. Privacy violation is a risk outcome. Data theft is a risk outcome. These are all examples of risk outcomes, and each of them has behaviors associated. And that's what CybDB basically explains. It literally says, if the risk outcome you care about is malware infection, maybe you're concerned about ransomware, here are the 14 behaviors you should focus on.
And that's sebdb.org I'll put a link as well in the notes. Sorry, .com, sebdb.com. Got it. We'll put a link there. I think the other end of the spectrum with this stuff, I always take like the devil's advocate view for some of these things is like, well, I can just enforce a strong password. Like, why did that user, if that's important, why did the user even enter one in the first place? And like, yeah, I mean, unsafe websites, are we failing as a security organization if we're not doing filter? If we knew it was unsafe, why would we let them visit it? So I'm curious. I mean, I get this question a lot too. We do, because we do simulations and very similar, but how you reconcile those kinds of viewpoints.
I think it's an understandable point, even if it's not relatively limited perspective. So often we hear security professionals say exactly that. I can control or enforce what my users do, and therefore I don't need to think about anything else. Or indeed, I don't need to do much more than maybe just give them general awareness training. But the reality is that if it was that simple, in most organizations, they would have zero human risk challenges. I.e., by that I mean that the way people use technology today would introduce very little risks to the organization because you could just enforce everything. But that's not true. It's not possible. Most organizations and most security leaders that we speak to, they admit, if they're being honest with themselves, that there are probably things that people are doing that are introducing unnecessary or unwanted risk to the organization. You can't enforce everything, not without completely locking down your systems such that most people can't do their jobs. That's number one. Number two, the threat environment and threat actors change and evolve. So you can't necessarily enforce something that you are not prepared for or don't know about. If we were having this conversation 3.5 years ago, we would not be talking about GenAI misuse. We just simply wouldn't be. So if you basically take the view that says, I'm going to find out about something and then I'm going to lock it down and that's all I need to do, and never think about the actual behaviors that people might exhibit, then you would not be able to address the behaviors that ultimately manage or get ahead of another risk, simply because the behavior itself means that you are, or addressing the behavior itself means that you're reducing the chance that somebody might do something else that introduces risk to the organization. You'd basically be playing catch up every single time, and that doesn't make sense. And so often we hear this, people talk to us about things like, oh, well, actually, we're thinking about just training our people. We love the idea that the CybSafe platform allows us to nudge and address behaviors, but we're thinking about using the tools that we have to block it. And we're saying, well, that's using those tools to try to address a risky behavior is like literally using your shoe brush to brush your teeth. You can do it if you want to, but it's not what it's designed for, and it's probably not going to have the same impacts that you would ultimately want. You want people to be able to do their jobs, live their lives, but do so as securely and safely as possible.
Got it. Yeah, it's funny. On the first one, I worked at a bank many years ago, and case in point, we back then everyone was really big on inline intrusion prevention systems, right? IDS or IPS if it's inline, and preventing IDS if it's observing, and we would never turn it on, because the risk of us disrupting one person's, job when they're transferring tens or hundreds of millions of dollars was never worth it. So like a lot of these things, in the ideal world, you would do it, but almost no one wants to take the business risk of enabling all these things, just blocking them outright. And yeah, I think that most organizations, they want to, let people explore and adopt these things and kind of be adults about it, right? But yeah, if something is like obviously malicious, that should probably be blocked, right? But all these things where you let people go out and kind of make decisions, if you want to let them do that, I think you need something to fill that gap for sure. And just in the interim, when new things come out, like, we simulate calendar invite attacks, right? You get an ICS. It bypasses a lot of the email security gateways. People, I was talking to an organization, they had like 50,000, phishing calendar invites show up. And they're like, what do we do now? And it's going to take them, quite some time at their scale to go and mitigate that, right? So sometimes in the short term, the mitigation is just like literally focusing on your people. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just think it's a tool in your toolkit and arsenal to go solve cybersecurity problems and reduce risk, right?
That's exactly right. Because some of these things are just genuine, real world business processes that are going to occur. The alternative is to kind of completely shut it down and then completely lose that functionality or capability in the organization. It's just not realistic. One of the banks we work with, they did have a particular issue where they had a number of users within the organization, like thousands of users in the organization, saving passwords with all other credentials, but primarily passwords in places that they wouldn't want them to be saving them. These were good people trying to do their jobs, simply saving sensitive information into kind of Word documents and into Jira instances and various other places. they could see that this was happening because they actually, I think in their case, they were using Big ID or some other visibility platform. They could even actually remediate the activity itself, which is fantastic, which is absolutely the right thing to do. But they were then also spending hours and indeed a lot of money every single week, basically chasing people up saying, why did you do this? Do you need to do this? Can we help you with another way of doing it? A lot of absolute waste of time for human beings, and indeed costing them over the course of a year, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So what they're able to do now is, of course, send nudges and prompts and reminders to people of things that people might be doing, automating the process of that follow-up, the second bit of that remediation. And when it comes to behavior change, we often forget that if you're just blocking things or taking care of stuff and ultimately changing the kind of core behavior, you're just going to deal with it later on. It's just going to be a problem for you later on. So, yeah, interesting to see.
I guess with that, this idea of nudges, and I know there's like a lot of like cognitive science and research on this. I'm curious if you see a point where people just like give up because they're getting too many things, or, you know, the people that are creating nudges may not necessarily be consuming it the same way. So they may not feel how much noise they're creating. I'd love to know what you see go horribly well and horribly wrong in that area.
Do you know what? Nudges is one of the things that, again, is in many ways a little bit contentious, but also has quite a few people running wildly rather excited because they think they've found the holy grail, and they haven't. First thing that I would say is maybe most people don't understand what a nudge is. And so most people are referring to any single kind of notification, any single kind of prompt, any single kind of alert as a nudge. And that's not necessarily the case. In fact, a nudge doesn't even need to be any of those things. It's a change and an alteration of choice architecture. That's what a nudge is. And so, for example, if you're forcing somebody to do something, if you're sending them a message that ultimately they cannot ignore or they cannot do something about, it's something other than what you want them to do with it, then that is not a nudge. Is our, like I said, a change of choice architecture. So people can and must be able to ignore nudges, or indeed to switch them off, etc. And so in our space, the nudges we think about are largely digital behavior change interventions. That's what people are trying to achieve. But like I said, nudges don't need to be digital. So, can I see a world in which nudges, as most people within security and the human risk management space, overwhelming people with notifications? Absolutely. In fact, this is where the term sludge comes from. You know, it's very possible to just bombard people with information, or indeed with notifications, alerts, thinking that you're being helpful, but being impressively not helpful. In fact, doing nothing but ignoring or frustrating users. That wouldn't be a great use of the capability or technology, and it certainly wouldn't be a particularly scientific or evidence-based approach. So nudges delivered to people at the right time in the right way, and of course, different context, different ways to produce nudges. There's a whole science behind all of this. They can be very helpful and very useful, but they do need to be thought about. And my watch, if I've been sat down for too long, sends me a nudge, digital behavior change intervention, to tell me that I've been sat down for too long. I don't have to stand up. I can completely and utterly ignore the thing. It actually records the data if I do stand up or if I don't, and it adjusts accordingly. This is a very tried and tested way of influencing people's behaviors. Likewise, if I'm going from A to B, I don't want my phone to teach me about the kind of the way in which to read a map. It simply literally says, get to the road, turn right, get to the church, turn left, and gives me various prompts and things. My watch, back to that standing up, doesn't teach me about the importance of blood circulation. It just gives me the help I need. If applied well, it can be really effective. If applied badly, it can just be annoying.
What is it really bad? Do you have any war stories of people that just, you know, got this kind of capability and just really blow things up?
There's no shortage of examples, because the reality is, like most technologies applied, the way that the user, or the kind of, in our particular case, and when we produce platforms like yours or mine, the administrators deploy them, that is really where the effectiveness is. So we try to give people as much help as we can, but we've definitely come across people who, the reason they moved to the CybSafe platform was because they said that the capabilities that we were using before weren't very effective. But in reality, what they were doing wrong was they were choosing to deploy whatever capability they had in a bad way. And so it wasn't until we literally had to handhold them and say, you do realize that if your sole job is to keep sending people a message, and in some cases the same thing over and over again, simply because they're not doing what you want, that is not either one, a nudge, or two, an effective use of the way in which to do it. So that's a good example of something we see have happened, and indeed we help people with improving on that. Another example is actually just people like guessing about what to deploy. Bank we were working with, I'm really concerned about social engineering. They absolutely were actually quite progressive in their thinking. They wanted to deploy nudges. And so they said, right, we need to change the way and the number of people who report this particular issue. Therefore, we're going to send nudges. And we're like, well, stop. Bear in mind, this is a large organization, 235,000 employees. And they were concerned with a group that was only 18,000. So they wanted to send these nudges to 18,000 people. Well, stop. How do you know that's going to work? Why don't you test with the control group, test this and test that and see which one's most effective? They were able to significantly increase the chance within literally a matter of hours and then scale the thing that works really well. Most people, they kind of play at science. And if you're going to use nudges, you should probably follow through and do it in a bit more scientifically.
Yeah, that's a good point. The whole coming from a different vendor thing. I mean, one thing I had an old boss used to always drill into me, like the idea of whole product thinking. The product isn't just the software you ship, it's helping people use it. And I think in both of our areas, it's been a pretty massive disservice to admins and customers where like they've been given these cannons or, foot guns galore and they have fun. I think, phishing simulations in particular get a really bad rap because the common guidance is, hey, go send the same email to like 100,000 people and they click the link and you're going to like put a training video in the middle of their workday and they have to go watch it. And like, well, obviously, like back to science and logic, the attackers don't just send the same email and click the link and you're good. So you have to sometimes ask yourself, like the guidance that you're getting, is that really what the attackers would do? Is it really emulate or reduce a risk? And I think the same analogy applies in simulations as it does to actually, doing nudges on these things.
That's exactly right. And you think about it, that's just in the case of actually how they are helping sticking training, like you say, in the middle and completely interrupting somebody's day and ultimately punishing them because you're now forcing them to do some crap training in the middle of, because they failed a phishing simulation. The reality is that it's extended as well. I can't tell you how many people that I've come across who ultimately is a power trip. I can send phishing simulations, so I'm going to make it as difficult as I possibly can in order to trick as many people as I can. And in fact, you should have seen the way we got them with X, Y, or Z. It's a power trip. And people suddenly get carried away about the fact that they can do something that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. But ultimately, they're misusing the technology. They're not helping their people, and they're stealing time off their organization.
Yep. You could add up what's the average, hourly wage, multiply it by the amount of time people spend in the training and the thing. And it's actually pretty significant cost, way more than a tool that you've paid for.
That's exactly right. And so one of the things that we measure ourselves against, we believe if we do our job right, we should be reducing the amount of time that your people are spending training. That is literally time taken away from the organization. And if you could do it in half the time, why would you not? There in and of itself is ROI. Here we have given the organization time back.
Yeah, no, that's something we talk a lot about internally, which is, hey, we're not really a training company, but I do think the huge opportunity in training is to just reduce the amount of time. Okay, everyone is great. People we can generate AI videos and it's like, cool, we can make more content. That's not what we need. We don't just need like more, hey, I spent 5 minutes having AI generate something that I'm now going to make. I spent 20 minutes on, I'm now going to spend 1 hour times 10,000 people of their time watching it.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous when you think about it, especially when you think about how people are judged. Now, I say it's ridiculous, but we have to also be quite honest with ourselves about these. Many of the security teams, if you think about what they are trying to do, and if you think about the basis upon which it's built. So the basis upon which it's built, there's an assumption that if we train more people, they will behave better. More training equals better behavior. This is simply not true. In a previous life, when I was a slightly less well-behaved young man, I may have driven my car and my motorbike and other people's cars and motorbikes a little bit too fast. I found myself on the speed awareness course. Speed awareness course, which I thought was going to be a complete waste of time. It's actually a very good course. I really enjoyed it. I learned lots. I really genuinely did learn things I didn't understand. And helpfully, I passed the course. Can I honestly say I'd never driven above the speed limit again ever since? No. There are doctors who smoke. Think about it. They know everything there is to know about, or most things that most human beings need to know, more, certainly more than about looking after themselves and delivering good wellness outcomes. Yet they smoke. So if it was simply about knowledge and understanding, that wouldn't be the case.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I had a customer once who had a special forces background, and we were talking about, this is what you first designed the product, how realistic should we make the simulation? And he was like, we should make it as realistic as possible, and you shouldn't train ahead of time, because he's like, when you do counter-interrogation training, they do all of the interrogating, then afterwards they say to identify things that you felt, and you can't do that by like watching a video first. It's like, you watch a video, like, here's how you drive, and then like, go get them. You gotta get in the car and you gotta reflect a bunch.
I think there are different approaches that are really appropriate for different circumstances, but the reality is, depending on what you do, it's one of the reasons why I love the Mirage platform. I love the idea that you're basically not just evolving with the way that the criminals are evolving, but also the dynamism that comes along with that. That's absolutely really important because it's such a key attack vector. It's constantly evolving, and we also know that most organizations, if they can save themselves times in doing so, why would you not? It just simply doesn't make sense. And then to be able to measure whether it's making any difference, that for us is the essence of HRM. We started this conversation saying, what is going on with this HRM stuff, and why are people getting so worked up about it? But I actually genuinely believe, back to the confusion, we've got the situation where lots of people have said everything is HRM. Personal view, everything is not HRM. If it was all HRM, we'd all be focused on the outcomes. Did anything change? And obviously that matters. Not did more people complete training, not did we get more content produced, not did people really like it and enjoy it? None of those things are bad, but they're not ultimately the determinants of risk. They are at best contributors.
Yeah. So I guess for listeners and watchers thinking about a lot of organizations I talk to, a lot of organizations I speak with are looking to move from, from security awareness to human risk management, trying to be a little more strategic about how they go about this. How do you start? What's day zero look like?
Yeah. Well, there are, and this is one of the things I've also enjoyed about the space at the moment. There are a number of people and organizations, I suspect as well, but certainly some of the people that I know, I think some of it, I think of the likes of Jason and others who are literally kind of making it really possible for themselves, or making it really easy for organizations to get that help on that start journey, because so many organizations don't know where to start. We would suggest that people always start with the end in mind. Always start with the end in mind. So, for example, if an organization says, I would like to go on the HRM journey, move from security awareness to HRM, we would always ask them why. What is it you're actually trying to achieve? Well, we want to get more people to complete training. Why? Why do you want more people to complete training? Because we want to drive up engagement. What do you want to drive up? Because we believe that it affects behaviors. Which behaviors are you talking about? So if you can get them to the end, to visualize the end, then they can work backwards from there. So we would say, start with the end in mind. You want to reduce a risk. What is that risk you want to reduce? Which are the behaviors associated with that risk? And then start thinking about the interventions that you might apply, or the reasons why they're not happening in the first place. Ross, most of the people I know in security, when they think about changing behavior, they think about the driving forces. They think about all of the things that they could do to change behavior, as in inflict upon people. They don't think about the restraining forces. They don't think about all the things that are getting in the way in the first place. And so if they could remove the restraining forces, as well as maybe apply some driving forces, they would get behavior change much faster. So we would say HRM, start with the end in mind. What is it you're trying to achieve, and work backwards from there?
Yeah. I guess thinking about that, that in itself is pretty, for a large organization and someone within it, it's a lot of detective work. And it's crazy as it sounds to go figure out, what does that really mean? I'm curious if you've seen just common patterns of this, of, hey, organizations usually start with these kinds of behaviors, these areas, just because they're so widespread.
Yeah, we definitely see some common behavior patterns, which is not at all surprising. So there are very few organizations I've ever come across who are concerned about social engineering. So if they're concerned about social engineering, they're concerned about behaviors such as, are people reporting suspicious messages? Are people clicking on links that they shouldn't be clicking on? Are people submitting data or providing data to malicious phone calls, or indeed to malicious emails, or various other things? So those are good examples of start points. Right now, and indeed over the last 12 months, we've seen a significant increase in the number of organizations that are really concerned about GenAI misuse. What kinds of GenAI misuse? What are the behaviors there? Are people putting the right type of information into the wrong LLM? That's one. Are people using the wrong LLM behavior? Or indeed, are people putting the wrong information into the wrong LLM? We see that as well. So those are three behaviors on that front. Password misuse. So are people using weak passwords? Are they reusing passwords? Are they sharing password amongst themselves? Are they using passwords that have been exposed? Again, a variety of behaviors associated with passwords. That's generally kind of really 70% of the time in any organization we spend time in, they're all concerned about those behaviors. And then there are some others that are maybe a little bit less kind of universal as well. In the security behavior database, actually catalogs about 107 different behaviors. Most organizations we speak to actually generally prioritize between 3 and 12, somewhere along that. So a much smaller number than you would imagine. And they say, if we can change these 3 to 12, we'd be happy.
Yeah, I met one organization who they had a rule, they could only have 3 or 4 at a time. That was it.
That's honestly,
your security score was literally just your security score is, it's transparent to everyone. You can log in. I mean, they built something for this because they have a lot of massive organization, and it was very, when they started, there was nothing in the market that could have bought. But yeah, it's I think it was doing your training, timely training. I think there was password use, updating your computer, and something else, and people loved it. You got a little score off of that.
There's a danger there. Doing your training, a common behavior that we hear people talk about. But remember what I said about thinking about the end in mind. Doing your training, how is that a security behavior in and of itself that will achieve what you want? I told you about the doctors who smoke. I told you about me and my speeding driving. So people doing their training and people behaving securely, it's not the direct correlation that we think about. So it's one of the reasons why it often does need to be more than one behavior.
Mm-hmm.
There's another side to this, Ross, which is often we think about the negative things that people do. But if you don't understand the positive behaviors too, then you actually don't really have a view on resilience.
Mm.
The positive behaviors are as important as the negative behaviors if you want to understand how resilient your organization is, because some of those things are the things that are keeping your organization safe, and also changes in those things help you understand where you should be focused. So back to that point about saving ourselves time and helping the right people and not just blanket kind of sending everybody everything. Not everybody needs the same help. So if you can understand the good behaviors as well as the suboptimal behaviors, you've got a much clearer view about how you can reduce risk and
good behaviors being things like report rate, for example.
Good behaviors. Yeah. Well, the report rate it might be a metric. The behavior simply being reporting a suspicious message. So the behavior itself is reporting a suspicious message in there. The metric that you might choose to measure that might be the report rate in that case.
And is that like, okay, we do a sim every month. Is that, do I look at if someone did it once for the year, are they good? Is it twice? Like, how do you then, slice and dice this stuff?
This is where it gets, I think, really, it's really important to just be clear about what's the risk appetite for the organization? How much do they care? Not every organization is not the same. This is where we believe that if somebody's telling you that this is the way that you do this thing and this is the only way you do it, then either you've got very lucky because they happen to be talking to the organization, that's the perfect way, or indeed they're just giving you a blanket answer. They don't really care about your organization. You have to do some work too. This is the reality. You have to do some work too. If somebody said to me, this is how you use a CRM, you don't use it any other way, use the CRM, use all of the features like this, and this is going to guarantee you all the revenue that you want. I'd say to them, you've never run a business, you've never used a CRM tool really properly before, and you're just making it up. That's just not the way it works. I've got to do my work too. Great CRM tool. Here's how we're going to use it in order to generate revenue.
Yeah. I think digesting this, I think that one of the things I'd recommend for someone if they were trying to go through this journey is, like you said, starting at the end in mind, is like sit down, write the behaviors down. If you can't make that list, things you care about, go talk to people till you can make that list. And then, don't jump to tools. Like just try to even understand what the risk looks like today, because you don't necessarily need tools to collect this stuff. Like, even the example of GenAI use, right? You could probably work with your team to go look at web proxy data and look at people who are using, ChatGPT, for example, on your network, if you have that. Like there's a lot of things that I think people can do without jumping to getting a tool that will set them up to be in a really good spot for when they do work with a vendor to be able to go and actually evaluate them properly given their needs. And I worry that with all this vendor washing, people are like, oh, I could just go and buy that thing. And you really can't buy. You can't buy behavior change. You can't buy culture change. You can't buy, risk reduction for the most part, unless you're buying cyber insurance. So just really people starting with like, sit down and like write this stuff down. If you can't do that, maybe you shouldn't start this journey. Is that fair to say? Do you agree with that statement?
I certainly agree that if you can't write this stuff down, then that's the thing to stop and resolve. I definitely agree with that. I don't know. I agree that it's realistic to expect people to go and measure all of these things with a pencil and paper or an abacus before they use the tool, because even you could take it one stage further and say, why would you use a spreadsheet to do it? Go and do it with a pencil and paper. So I think that the reality is that depending on the scale and the size of the challenge, you will determine whether or not you need a tool to help you. But I do agree with your principle, which is a lot of people are being told, go out and buy X and you will get Y, and that is not true. And so what you're saying about kind of just stop and work out what it is that you need first, I think that's absolutely right. And speak to people. Like I said, I'm not saying this is a plug. The security behavior database is a plug clearly, but it's a free open source tool. You don't have to pay a thing. You don't owe a vendor a simple thing. If you're not sure which behaviors to start with, go and have a look at it. Literally just take it and use it. It's literally free. No one should be charged for that type of stuff. That's like literally behavior change 101.
Yeah, I wish there was more material out there for folks to be able to pick up and just start with. I think CybDB is one of the few pieces of material where you can look up, HRM and this thing pops up and it's like clearly vendor neutral and actionable, right? There's not a book right now you can buy that's like, here's the, dummy's guide to doing HRM. As far as I know, there's no.
Not to HRM. There are dummies guides and indeed lots of vendor neutral books on behavior change. Remember, of course, security, we're not the first industry as well that's been trying to change behavior for quite some time. So actually, that's one of the other things as a community we need to do is look much more at other industries and other fields and indeed how they've applied and addressed some of these challenges. Yeah, I mean, security is noisy, Ross. You know this. You know that there's no shortage of kind of loud voices. And indeed, many people come from a relatively well-lit perspective. We want to help. therefore buy our stuff, use our stuff, read our stuff.
Never happened. Nope. We're entirely altruistic.
With automation, this is where we just need to really kind of be honest with ourselves and be really clear, and also put our stuffs out there so that people can evaluate it. Ultimately, not everything is right for every organization, and many organizations, they don't need a tool. They just need to actually think about the approach that they're taking and maybe adjust that approach. That might be their start point long before they get they need to start picking up tools.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Awesome. Other questions I got for you. Oh, hey, workforce security. Have you heard about this new term coming in? I feel like people are starting to use workforce security now, HRM. But speaking of the confusion, I'm curious if you had a take here. What the hell is going on?
Like I said, I don't get fixated on the terms. I think they'll all come and go. I genuinely believe so. I think HRM will come and go. I think workforce security as a term, adaptive security, adaptive, protective security. These are all, there's nothing wrong in themselves with any of them, and there's nothing right in themselves with any of them. Anybody who gets fixated on the term, and indeed some people getting really worked up, especially like the kind of old school, diehard security awareness professionals who are really offended and really upset that people might deviate from the idea of security awareness. It's absolute buffoonery. It's a distraction, and they're all getting absolutely lost in like really easy things to spend time on, but they're not the right things to be spending time on. So I'm not at all surprised to hear that there are new terms, not least of which because, of course, we all know that every vendor wants to create a category and there's no faster way to create a category than come up with another bloody name. But if we're just putting ourselves in the perspective of practitioners who are trying to achieve risk reduction in their organizations, the simple question we should ask ourselves is anything different? And hey, even if it's not different, if it works for you in your organization, go for it. Call it whatever is right for yourself. Just do the right thing. And the reason I personally like the idea of moving away from security awareness as the term is that even if you could make the argument that security awareness was more than awareness, which you can understand the stupidity of that statement already, but if you could make the argument yourself, you would not be able to get away from the fact that in the eyes of most practitioners and most security leaders, security awareness is about training and education, and it's not that well respected. So if we're serious about elevating the human aspect of this work, we need it to be respected, we need it to be taken seriously, and we need it to be understood that it's about more than just training and education. Call it whatever you like. Just make sure that you achieve that objective.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Awesome. What else? Last few questions here. I feel like I had a spicy take somewhere in here that I feel like we got a bunch of them.
You've always got a spicy take, Ross.
Oh yeah, I'd love to, good plug on, I'd love to hear about the paper that you put out that has been making the rounds on LinkedIn.
I think the paper that you're talking about is maybe the academic paper, so the peer-reviewed academic paper on HRM. Yeah, one of the things that we realized, and so, for us, the evidence base is really important. We believe that we shouldn't be making stuff up that doesn't need to be made up. And if it is a hypothesis that's being tested, then we should do that in a scientific way as possible. And we should build technology, in our particular case, applying research for technology use on a sound evidence base. And we should contribute to the evidence base. That's a kind of set of principles that is not unique to CybSafe, definitely not unique to security ultimately. So research is really important to us, and it's the way we build great technology, but it's also the way that we contribute and help make things better, even if people don't use CybSafe. But we realized that when it came to HRM, relatively new term, nobody had actually really done any academic research on HRM. So we just did the first piece of research, which is important to us. Remember, we do a lot of research. It's funny, it got a lot of attention, but the reality is it's just one of a number of things that we've done. And we basically just asked a question, which is, what do people think of HRM? Yeah. What does it mean to you? What is it? Largely all that what merged with three schools of thought. One was that HRM is nothing new. It's basically security awareness rebranded or relabeled. The second was that it's a kind of slight evolution of the security awareness space. It's basically security awareness plus integrations or plus nudges that generally. And then the third was that it's a fundamentally different approach. And for what it's worth, as I've described already, happen to be more in the latter category, because I said to you, HRM in our view is the use of data in order to identify and measure risky behaviors and then address them in real time with automated personalized interventions. But the fact of the matter is, we are not right. There's a range of views, and the research enabled us to just uncover the range of views.
Awesome. That is very relevant to this discussion. Oz, if folks want to reach out to you or CybSafe, how do they best engage?
Dude, if they're not already having their feeds bombarded by our propaganda, then they'll find us on LinkedIn, of course. And in reality, and less jesting, www.cybsafe.com. We put all of our information. We put as much as we can do publicly out there because we believe that actually that's the way we all get better and we all move forward collectively. The security behavior database can be found at sebdb.com or securitybehaviordatabase.com. And of course, I spend my time split between the UK and the US. For those who are listening in the US, you can probably tell by my dodgy accent that I don't hail from this side of the pond. In reality, I'm backwards and forwards a lot. And we're really proud of the work we're doing, but we're really proud in particular of the fact that we're not doing it by ourselves. They're great vendors like Mirage. They're also great individuals and great organizations like the National Cybersecurity Alliance and indeed NIST and MITRE, all doing amazing work. And we need to put it out there. Different organizations will find the things that they need, and we need to turn the noise down a little bit. Please find us at any of those places. Please criticize as much as you can do, or provide as much input as you can do. We love it, and we're here for it all because we ultimately believe that no one has the right answer on their own.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, Oz.